Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 2nd of July. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is the Full Scottish. This afternoon, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 494 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce today's guest, and then together we will take a look at the past week's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Vladimir Putin's admission that the Wagner Group had been fully funded by the Russian state could make it easier for an international court to prosecute him for war crimes, experts in international law have said. In the year to May 2023 alone, Wagner reportedly received more than 86 billion rubles from the state budget, or over $1 billion. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has warned that a serious threat remains at the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, and that Russia is technically ready to provoke a localized explosion at the facility. Air defense systems were engaged early today to repel a Russian air attack on Kyiv, Ukraine's Air Force said. Witnesses heard blasts resembling the sound of air defense systems hitting targets, but there was no immediate information about potential damage. A 51-year-old man has been killed and two others injured by shelling in Mala Tokmachka, a village near the front line in the southeastern region of Zaporizhia, local officials have said. The head of the local military administration, Yuri Malashko, described the site as a front-line community under merciless enemy fire. President Biden will host the Swedish Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, next week to talk about transatlantic security cooperation and the war in Ukraine. The two leaders will review our growing security cooperation and reaffirm their view that Sweden should join NATO as soon as possible. Despite its status as a neutral country, Austria has announced its intention to join the European Sky Shield initiative, launched in 2022 by Germany against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine. The Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer said the decision did not call into question the neutrality of the country, but said the move was in response to a threat that had considerably worsened. The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez pledged the EU's unequivocal support for Ukraine during a visit to Kyiv on the first day of Spain assuming the presidency of the EU. President Zelensky has expressed frustration over the slow delivery of weapons and lack of clarity over pilot training by some Western nations. And a 9-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy have been injured by Russian shelling of a residential area in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson, according to the regional governor. Now, we're lucky enough to be joined this afternoon by Emma Harper MSP. After joining the SNP in 2010, Emma stood for election as the SNP candidate for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale in the 2015 UK election, losing out to David Mundell by just 798 votes after achieving a swing of over 27.5%. Nevertheless, Emma was elected to the Scottish Parliament 1 year later as an MSP for South Scotland, with the SNP picking up 120,217 votes across the region. Emma is now a member of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee, as well as a number of cross-party groups, including the Wellbeing Economy, Lung Health, Diabetes, Health Inequalities, the USA, and the Recreational Boating and Marine Tourism. Emma, it's a while since you and I have last spoken. How are you keeping today?
Very well, thank you, Andrew. It's quite interesting to hear somebody reading back what I've been up to in Parliament as far as cross-party groups and everything. Quite a wide range of cross-party groups there.
Definitely, and I think that makes you ideally qualified to be joining us on the Full Scottish this afternoon on Broadcasting Scotland. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Our first item this afternoon is that the government's focus on Brexit crowded out and prevented the work that was needed to prepare for the next pandemic, the lead lawyer to the COVID-19 inquiry has said. Hugo Keith, KC, told the inquiry that work arising from the threat of a no-deal exit from the EU under Boris Johnson may have drained the resources and capacity that were needed for pandemic planning. He said it was clear that such planning from 2018 onwards crowded out and prevented some or perhaps a majority of the improvements that central government itself understood were required to make resilience planning and preparedness, The Operation Yellowhammer document, published by Westminster in 2019, set out a series of reasonable worst-case assumptions about what would happen if the UK did not reach a deal with the EU. Johnson had ordered the government to prepare for the strongest possibility of a no-deal. The Yellowhammer document suggested that there would be real risks of public disorder, higher food prices, and reduced medical supplies. Hugo Keith told the inquiry, did the attention therefore paid to the risks of a no-deal exit drain the resources and capacity that should have been continuing the fight against the next pandemic, that should have been utilised in preparing the UK for civil emergency? Or did all that generic and operational planning in fact lead to people being better trained and well marshalled, and in fact better prepared to deal with COVID, and also to the existence of improved trade, medicine and supply links? Mr. Keith added, the evidence so far, we very much fear that it was the former. So, Emma, firstly, is this line of questioning and this approach by Hugo Keith KC, is it perhaps a strong indication of a direction that the inquiry might take during this first phase? What I mean is a suggestion that preparation for everything associated with the pandemic was inadequate due to Brexit, but Brexit was ultimately the will of the people, at least the people in England and Wales.
Well, certainly, as you've just said, that Brexit vote was higher in England and Wales than it was in Scotland, and when hearing the evidence at the COVID inquiry, it looks like Brexit was significant in diverting the attention of civil servants because they were preparing for that and preparing for a no deal. Actually, a no deal that didn't have to happen. We could have still been in the single market and the customs union, but it looks like that Hugo as KC is quite good at finding the right way to probe the witnesses in order to establish what happened and why it happened. And I think, as this inquiry proceeds, it will be really interesting to hear how the different witnesses respond to his questions. And of course, the First Minister was former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was there this week as well.
Absolutely, Emma. And just thinking about this potential line of defence, you might think that Westminster government will take that yes, resources were diverted to Brexit planning, but Brexit planning was required because people voted for it. Given the impact that it's now being accepted that Brexit has caused in a wide range of aspects of life in the current United Kingdom, do you think this line it's as a result of Brexit, but you voted for it? Is that going to be used to excuse the chronic inability of the Westminster government to deliver anything in the run-up to the next general election?
Mm. Yeah, I think we've seen the damage that Brexit has caused, especially for us in Scotland, with our our tourism industry, our agricultural businesses, and healthcare as well. And there were calls for the exit from the European Union to be delayed. Nobody planned a pandemic, and the pandemic was upon us. But the UK government just continued to move on. There was no acknowledgement that, okay, yes, you did vote for Brexit, people in England, but we could delay that so that we can protect lives and save lives and look after our most vulnerable people in society. That should have taken precedence over anything else. I know that a delay could have probably assisted our civil servants and all our healthcare staff and everybody. They could have been able to implement probably pandemic planning in a better way if they hadn't been diverted from planning for a no deal.
Thanks, Emma. And one last element of this aspect of the baking in of or the acceptance of political realities. Given that all that's happened to Johnson recently, do you think will the inquiry ultimately conclude that Westminster decision making, or the lack of it, to be more accurate, was political, And again, the voters in England had chosen Johnson and knew very well what they were getting. To quote Ben Elton, a mendacious, narcissistic sociopath as Prime Minister.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear Ben Elton make those comments last Sunday. I think that was on Laura Kuenssberg, and I can't, I can't say what was in the minds of the voters in England because I don't live in England. I don't know what was going through their minds when they're choosing Boris Johnson, who now we know has been exposed as misleading Parliament in many occasions, and actually people are outright saying, yeah, he was a liar. So I worry that we'll just have more of the same at the next and future general elections. We really need a reset for politics in England. We need people to really be cared for and looked after and supported. You know, the cost of living crisis, the the cost of food has totally skyrocketed. You know, we really need a government that really does foster the best for the people, and that's something that I'm not confident that we're going to see even in future general elections, whether it becomes Sir Keir Starmer as the next Prime Minister, because he seems to be on the right side of the centre as well. He seems to be purporting Tory policies just like the Tories are.
Well, you used the word reset, Emma, and that's a good question. What do you think are the prospects for this inquiry actually achieving anything? The inquiry is expected to run for about 4 years, so that's well after the next general election. Do you think that a theoretical Labour government will make any changes to disaster planning and pandemic preparation, or will it just be more of the same?
I think it'll be more of the same. I think Sir Keir Starmer is just going to sit in his hunkers and wait on the inquiry as it unfolds, because he wasn't in charge at the time. So whether he becomes the next prime minister or not, I don't think he has made any clear plans or ideas or processes to help support, our NHS workforce, and also, health and social care in the future as well. I think what we're going to see is just more of the same, more of the same, more of the same. So it's all the more reason why Scotland needs to pursue a different path, and pursue a path that works better for the people here in Scotland.
Thanks, Emma. And coming back to the inquiry more closely, it struck me this morning. Do you think is there a risk that the phasing of the inquiry now? Well, what I mean by that is that the inquiry is being run on a the phases are chronological. So the pre-pandemic is being looked at first. That's the first phase that we're in just now. Do you think is that going to have the effect of managing or blunting the public outrage into the very high numbers of people who died in the UK when compared to most other countries? The inquiry's not going to look at that for many, many months yet.
Yeah, I think it is important that however the inquiry proceeds, it needs to be done with a transparency to and take the necessary steps in order to achieve that. So we will still have our Scottish government, our COVID inquiry in Scotland as well. But I think as we delay any progress or take a step by step approach, you're right. It's by the time we get to the point where we're talking about the lives that have been lost, the most vulnerable people in society. My mum and dad have just had COVID. They managed to avoid it for 3 years, and last week the pair of them were really really unwell, and they're still not doing well. So we need to make sure that that the process takes place and we get answers, or however we're going to proceed in a way that supports and protects people for any potential future pandemics. We need to make sure that what we learn, and we get appropriate answers so that we can look after people in the future.
Thanks, Emma. Our best wishes from Broadcasting Scotland to both your folks. We hope that they get well soon, and that there's no long-term impact of the COVID that they have at the moment. But that's a very good reminder for people. The virus has not gone away. It simply is having a much less impact on our society now, but it's definitely still there. but our best wishes to your folks for their quick recovery.
Yep, thank you.
We'll move on now because on Wednesday this week, Court of Appeal judges ruled that it is unlawful to send asylum seekers to Rwanda to have their claims processed in a judgment that points out the shortcomings of Westminster government policy. The ruling follows a 4-day hearing in April against a High Court decision last December that it was lawful to send some asylum seekers, including people arriving on small boats, to Rwanda to have their claims processed there rather than dealing with their applications for sanctuary in the UK. 10 asylum seekers from Syria, Iraq, Iran, Vietnam, Sudan, and Albania brought the case, along with the charity Asylum Aid. The court ruled that due to deficiencies in the Rwandan asylum system, there was a real risk that people sent to Rwanda would be returned to their home countries, where they face persecution or other inhumane treatment, when in fact they already had a good claim for asylum in the UK. The court's conclusion was that Rwanda was not a safe third country, even though assurances by the Rwandan government were provided in good faith. While I respect the court, I fundamentally disagree with their conclusions, Rishi Sunak said. He continued, I strongly believe the Rwandan government has provided the assurances necessary to ensure that there is no real risk that asylum seekers relocated under the Rwanda policy would be wrongly returned to third countries, something that the Lord Chief Justice agrees with. So, Emma, Rishi Sunak said that the Tory government would seek to appeal this latest decision to the Supreme Court. So do you think is his plan simply to let this grind out until after the next general election, given the time it will take for the Supreme Court to hear the latest appeal? And do you think, does that mean that this entire Rwanda policy is never going to be implemented? And one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges is in fact a complete dead cat. It's just a distraction for the readers of the Daily Express and the Daily Mail.
Yeah, it is interesting that the court obviously made an assessment and an independent assessment and made a judgment that Rwanda isn't a safe third country, and because people might then just be sent back to their own home country, which they're fleeing from in the first place. So I think Rishi Sunak is trying to appeal to his Stop the Boats supporters, and it's choosing this pathway probably to appeal to them, and he probably has his advisors saying, yeah, if we can delay this and take it to appeal through the Supreme Court, that means that it will be after the next election that they can say, yeah, we're still pursuing this process as part of dealing with immigrants that are or people fleeing, asylum seekers, refugees that are coming to this country. So it probably is a tactic that the Prime Minister is using.
Thanks, Emma. Now, the court heard from the UNHCR that Rwanda had a record of human rights abuses towards refugees within its borders, including refoulement, which is the forced removal to countries where they are at risk, and expulsions and arbitrary detentions. The Refugee Agency said the Home Office would not be able to guarantee the safety of asylum seekers who were deported to Rwanda. But Sir James Eadie KC, counsel for the Home Secretary, said that the Home Secretary was confident that the government of Rwanda would abide by undertakings given in a memorandum of understanding signed between the Westminster government and Rwanda. So, Emma, why do you think the Home Secretary would think that the government of another country would abide by undertakings when our own government most certainly does not?
Yeah, it's almost like every time we read about what's happening with the Home Office, and then issues around immigration, issues around protecting vulnerable people, refugees, even refugees that are children that are not being looked after properly. I find it just pretty gobsmacking that the Home Secretary will stand up and make statements that I don't believe that will actually protect vulnerable people that are seeking asylum or refugees in our country. It doesn't matter, I think, what people say. I believe what the court assessment is around the fact that Rwanda cannot guarantee how it will treat people who are being sent there. It's something that every day we're seeing another aspect to this way that this government are just cruelly treating people that are trying to flee from war and flee from persecution and fleeing from harm. So I suppose we need to watch this space to see the continuation of the cruel approach that the UK Tories are taking.
Thanks, Emma. Now, the key issue before the court was whether Rwanda was capable of delivering reliable outcomes on asylum claims and whether there was a risk that asylum seekers would be removed to their home countries after arriving in Rwanda, even if they had strong claims for asylum in the UK. Now, that struck me as slightly odd. At the moment, I think it's fair to say the perpetually not fit for purpose Home Office clearly is not capable of delivering reliable, timely outcomes for asylum seekers. So, why would you expect something different in Rwanda? And it struck me, I wonder why asylum seekers who are now trapped for months or years in hotel rooms and soon in barges and other ships, why should they not be raising claims that their lengthy detention by the Home Office is in breach of their human rights?
Um, Definitely agree with you. We've talked about for months helping support asylum seekers into employment in this country, for instance. The Home Office could grant uh, the ability for people to work. We've seen the harm again that Brexit has caused with our healthcare, with our tourism. People needed to, work in hotels and also in agriculture as well. So if the UK Home Office would help support asylum seekers by granting them the ability to get into work, we would probably have a more human approach to, rather than detaining them in hotels. And so I think there is different ways that we could address this with a more human rights angle. And certainly if we had the ability to have immigration devolved in Scotland, we would certainly be taking a different process and a more human rights based approach for our asylum seekers and refugees in Scotland.
Thanks, Emma. Now, famously or infamously, it's argued that Keir Starmer is further to the right than Enoch Powell on immigration. What I mean is that when he was Health Secretary, Enoch Powell brought more than 100,000 doctors and nurses from Pakistan and India to work in the NHS, whereas Keir Starmer says there are too many non-UK nationals working in the NHS nowadays. So, with Keir Starmer further to the right than Enoch Powell on immigration, do you think that a possible Labour government in Westminster after the next general election will in fact persist with the Rwanda policy or a very similar policy, just presenting it with slightly better PR?
Mm. And to hear the comments about how Keir Starmer thinks that there are too many non-UK nationals working in our National Health Service. We have massive challenges in our NHS. We've got an ageing population. We've got the older people get, the more complex the burden of diseases. So many people have then multiple comorbidities, so multiple health challenges. So we absolutely need people to come and choose to work in our care service, in social care, and in our National Health Service. And to hear what the Keir Starmer's pro-Brexit approach, his U-turns on issues around free school meals and supporting uh, education and the freedom of movement aspects. It seems like Keir Starmer is even more to the right of even many of the Tories. So I don't see any chance that any new government in Westminster is going to tackle the massive problems that we have and the challenges that we have, especially when we're trying to reform and reinvigorate our National Health Service in England, but also the challenges that we have for employment in Scotland. So I don't really favour Keir Starmer's words or his approach at all.
Thanks, Emma. We'll undoubtedly will be coming back to that story as it returns to the courts and to look at the politics of it as well. But let's move on now, because French authorities made hundreds of arrests on the fifth night of unrest, sparked by the fatal police shooting of a 17-year-old. But reports from across France indicated that rioting was much less intense. A total of 486 people were arrested across France by 3 a.m. local time this morning, Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said, adding that the level of violence appeared to have declined since rioting first broke out over the death of Nahel M in the Paris suburb of Nanterre on Tuesday. A calmer night thanks to the resolute action of the security forces, Darmanin tweeted earlier today. Now, he told reporters earlier that 45,000 members of the security forces would be deployed overnight between Saturday and Sunday, the same number as the night before. Extra forces and equipment were sent to Lyon, Grenoble, and Marseille, which saw intense rioting on Friday night. In Paris and its nearby regions, where 7,000 officers were out, 126 people were arrested by 1:30 this morning. The biggest flashpoint was in Marseille, where police fired tear gas and fought street battles with youths around the city centre late into the night. However, by midnight, authorities in Marseille and Lyon were reporting fewer incidents than the previous night, with 56 and 21 people arrested in the two cities, respectively. Nahel M, who had Algerian and Moroccan parents, was shot by a police officer during a traffic stop. Yesterday, friends and family attended a private funeral for the teenager. A large crowd gathered outside the local mosque and followed the coffin to the cemetery, many chanting, "Justice for Nahel." Lawyers for relatives had asked that journalists stay away from the ceremony, saying it was a day for Nahel's family to mourn with discretion. The shooting of a young man caught on video has reignited long-standing complaints of police violence and racism. President Macron has denied there is systemic racism in French law enforcement agencies. Now, Emma, systemic or institutional racism is said to be an issue in a number of police forces. The Police Nationale in France, as we've just been hearing, the Metropolitan Police in London, and Police Scotland, according to Sir Ian Livingston, the Chief Constable, who said in a statement on the 25th of May that Police Scotland is institutionally racist and discriminatory. Publicly acknowledging these institutional issues exist is essential to our absolute commitment to championing equality and becoming an anti-racist service. It's also critical to our determination to lead wider change in society. So firstly, Emma, why do you think security services have manifested and continue to manifest racism and discrimination amongst their ranks?
I'm sure that investigating the reasons why institutional racism occurs is probably over historically decades of how recruitment practices are made, or how people perceive the attitude or the I suppose the personality of who they want to be part of their team. For instance, I had experience when I lived in Los Angeles in 1992, when the Los Angeles riots happened after 4 police officers were acquitted from basically assaulting to a critical point Rodney King, and institutional racism was part of the whole reason why the Los Angeles police were basically tasked, or the way that they acted on minorities and ethnic groups in Los Angeles, and we still see that across America as well. So I think acknowledging that institutional racism is exists is the first, or one of the first ways that we need to do in order to then tackle it. So obviously there needs to be intensive engagement with the processes of how the departments, whether they're the Met Police in London, in Scotland, and of course in France as well, there obviously is going to be a real challenges in how they take an approach forward that actually takes apart what they're labeling as institutional racism, because it's something that needs to be delivered in a way. Our young people that are coming here that are harassed or perceived to be harassed, that they deserve better, and we need to make sure that whatever action is taken forward, the first thing of acknowledging this is something that will lead to better ways as changes are made. My focus would be in Scotland, but obviously we're seeing that across in other places, and of course in France right now.
Thanks, Emma. Now, the Chief Constable, Sir Ian Livingston, also said in the same statement that understanding and recognising institutional racism and all forms of institutional discrimination within Police Scotland can and should be a source of confidence and optimism for officers and staff for the organisation, that collectively we can lead necessary change in the service and indeed contribute to change across society. Scottish society, he was meaning. So it struck me that we're into marching season now. A march by the Bridgeton True Blues LOL 232 was planned to be held on Friday evening in several streets in Bridgeton, Denniston and the Calton, along Bridgeton Cross, London Road, Duke Street, and along Abercrombie Street in front of the St Mary of the Assumption Church. And of course, 4 marchers are reported to have been arrested at the Orange Order march to Glasgow Green yesterday. So against that backdrop in Scottish society, what do you think are the prospects for changing our society and leading the change that Sir Ian Livingston talks about?
So, my colleagues, I know that are in the constituency in Glasgow, are obviously aware and involved in what actions can be taken as we go forward. I think hearing about 4 people being arrested is obviously not good. I think when we're trying to support, I've read some postings about the police wanting to respect the people's right to march, but also needing to be able to uphold peace and supporting people who are witnessing marches, and especially as the routes do go past people's housing and then churches as well. So I know that it's not something I'm directly involved in myself, but my colleagues in the Scottish Parliament will be well aware of what action is needing to be taken, and it's something that I'm sure, as the marching season progresses, that right now we're in recess, but following parliamentary recess, I'm sure there will be work that's been taken forward that the government can support the delivery of the service, because I know that the police officers have real challenges in their daily work, and I know they will be very affected by what Sir Ian Livingston's comments are. But if work needs to be done, well, I'm sure work does need to be done. I think, again, acknowledging that that institutional racism exists is the first step to making changes.
Thanks, Emma. That's some great insight. Thank you. And just to draw this together again with Scotland, we're seeing perhaps the most serious civil unrest in France for several years. And there is an element of institutional racism, there's accusations of institutional racism against the police, something which it's acknowledged exists in Scotland as well. But the unrest in France has manifested itself most strongly in some of the poorest areas of France, both in the banlieue around Paris and in cities like Lyon and Marseille. Now, while Scotland no longer has the most deprived areas in the UK, there is still we still know that levels of poverty and deprivation are on the increase in Scotland. So, do you think that there is a risk that we will see a manifestation in Scotland of the same outrage and the same discontent, which may be being driven not by institutional racism but by poverty and social exclusion?
I know that Scottish Government is doing everything it can to tackle poverty and support young people and children and families in Scotland, and the introduction of the game-changing £25 per week child payment is one absolutely proactive step that the Scottish Government, led by the SNP, is taken forward to support our families in Scotland. I know there was announcements from the First Minister about supporting universal free school meals for primary ones through to primary fives, and expansion of free childcare. So the Scottish Government are taking forward policies in order to support uh, the challenges of tackling poverty and, of course, child poverty as well. So we just need to be really good as MSPs, politicians, in my work, in making sure that the public know that the Scottish Government are delivering policies in order to support them. Obviously, having our issues of challenges with our National Health Service, for instance, is huge, but the commitment to deliver the NHS free at the point of need is absolutely paramount, that we continue to do that. Our prescriptions in England are now £9.80, I think, whereas in Scotland that still remains free. So the Scottish Government is implementing policies to support and tackle uh, poverty, but support families. And I think that's something we really need to be conscious of, and making sure that we help support people as much as possible. We do need to look after our communities in the best way we can. We need to have the welfare state be the support mechanism for people, but we also need to support people into work and into work that they choose and that they want to proceed with, in order to help support their lives as well.
Thank you, Emma. Now, well, we were talking about poverty there, and we'll carry that on into our next item now, because yes, on Friday, the Office for National Statistics published its latest cost of living insights. It said the cost of living has been rising in recent months in the UK and across the world. Food and energy prices have been rising markedly over the past year, particularly gas prices, largely in response to the conflict in Ukraine. Global recovery from the COVID pandemic is putting further pressure on prices. In the UK, the price of consumer goods and services rose at the fastest rate in 4 decades in the year to October 2022. The annual inflation rate rose to 7.9% in the past 12 months, up from 7.8% in April 2023. Almost half, 43% of adults in Great Britain, have reported that it was very or somewhat difficult to afford their rent or mortgage payments. This was an increase from a quarter, 25%, in June 2022. Around half, 47% of adults reported that their rent or mortgage payments have gone up in the last 6 months, up from 30% in June last year. The prices of food and non-alcoholic beverages continue to rise sharply, but the rate of increase has begun to ease. Food and non-alcoholic beverage prices rose by 18.4% in the year to May 2023. So, Emma, firstly, what are you hearing from your constituents in South Scotland regarding the cost of living? Firstly, the cost of food and non-alcoholic beverages, but also the cost of mortgage payments and rent.
Yep. So the statistics you quoted, Andrew, are absolutely stark. And I'm hearing the same issues from constituents across the South Scotland region, from Eyemouth to Stranraer. The cost of living casework that I have now has just skyrocketed. I think we've seen an increase in almost 22% since the cost of living crisis caused by the Tories and their mismanagement of the economy. It's quite sad to hear what people are telling us. Mortgage increases by £400 a month. People absolutely choosing between heating their homes and buying food for their families. And I know we're into summer weather now, but the prospects don't bode well for upcoming winter as well. So I know that one of our local food banks, the First Base Food Bank, the First Base Agency, um, they keep in contact with me a lot, and the amount of food parcels being delivered across the southwest of Scotland has just increased many, many, many times. And Mark Franklin, who runs the food bank, keeps in touch with me regarding some of the prices, and he says it's the most um, it's the most people that are affected are the people that are living in the areas of higher deprivation. I saw a, a tweet about the cost of a tin of macaroni cheese a few months ago was £1.46 as the recommended retail price. It's now £2.22. So the cost of the yellow label foods that or like the what they call the Tesco own brand or Morrison's own brand, the cost of that has just completely increased. And you 19% was inflation on food was what my number was in front of me. So it's really challenging for families right now. And our local community cafe that I visited a couple of weeks ago, they are really trying their best to help support people to have a place of comfort, somewhere where they can go and meet persons who can support them into engaging in some kind of welfare or support that they need. But also, when I was there, there's ways where people can donate into like a fund where if a family does go into the community cafe, that the additional fund that other people can put into can help support someone to get breakfast or lunch or a cup of coffee or a cup of tea in order to support them as well. So there's some real challenges. Like for me, my casework again from Stranraer all the way to different parts of the South Scotland region, we're really seeing people affected by this cost of living crisis.
Thanks, Emma. And we'll look at energy as part of this cost of living crisis now, because some are saying that profiteering is the name of the game in the energy industry. In their book, The World for Sale, Javier Blas and Jack Fasci show how the big four commodity traders have been transformed by the recent crisis. Vital, Cargill, Glencore, and Trafigura made about £10 billion between them in the decade from 2010. In 2022, their net income was more than $46 billion in that 1 year. And Commonwealth, not Commonweal, Commonwealth, which is a left of centre think tank, has shown how the electricity industry is stuffed with price gouging firms, none more so than the electricity distribution companies. The 14 that connect National Grid to homes and offices have boasted profit margins of 43% last year. The gas distribution companies are showing profit margins of more than 36%. Now, I know we're in the summer months, but we're also past the summer solstice, so I'm going to start looking forward to winter. In May, you welcomed new details of a major expansion in the Fuel Insecurity Fund, supporting families struggling with the soaring cost of energy bills across Dumfries and Galloway. You said that households will also benefit from the SNP Scottish Government's allocation of £9 million to enable Advice Direct Scotland to administer home heating support fund grants to those struggling. And you also welcomed £8.5 million allocated to the Fuel Bank Foundation to support over 85,000 households, including those with prepayment meters and at risk of imminent disconnection, and £7.25 million directed to enable the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations to provide more than 55,000 households across Scotland with advice, support with bills, and energy-saving items. So, Emma, what impact are you seeing as a result of those various policy actions on fuel poverty by the Scottish Government? What else would you like the Scottish Government to do, and what other powers would you like the Scottish Government to have to address the energy aspect of the current cost of living crisis?
Mm-hmm. I think, I welcome all the actions that the Scottish Government uh, has taken and can take. Advice and support is great, but it's still, I think, what I've learned from my work with the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, we have an inquiry that we're undertaking right now into energy, because I'm part of the Economy Committee. And what I've learned is, the market, the way energy is regulated, right? So it's reserved to Westminster. So Scotland doesn't have a say over energy. But what we're finding with this inquiry is that, Scotland produces renewable energy, whether it's from wind, whether it's from solar, whether it's from wave. We produce so much renewable energy, but we can't determine the price that goes to people's homes, for instance. So I think the last time I looked at it, it was like 47 pence a kilowatt for the energy that people pay for in their homes, right? It's some aspects of it. But I think totally when we're looking at this as part of our inquiry, the energy market, it needs to be reformed. We need to be looking at how tariffs are adjusted. We had people from Shetland into Parliament this week, demonstrating that offshore wind for Shetland, they produce much more than they need and then they export it. So how can we not have a Shetland only tariff, for instance? Well, so that's something that in I would want the Scottish Government energy ministers, and including the First Minister, to do all they can to alter the way that the market is regulated. Because if we're producing all our energy from renewable sources in Scotland, we really should be able to manage the pricing in a way that helps support people to have cheaper energy, so that the advice and the support that is taking place right now, ultimately we need the energy costs to be reduced for the people in Scotland. Issues of getting our energy to the grid and then getting it off the grid. So the whole creation, transmission, distribution, the whole energy market needs to be reviewed and changed, so that the people in Scotland can benefit from the fact that we actually produce more than we need.
Thanks, Emma. And I wanted to look at the cost of living crisis from one more perspective quickly. The number of UK households struggling with heavy debt has increased by 2/3 since 2017, according to Debt Justice, a charity that campaigns against unjust debt. They found that about 12.8 million adults in the UK are falling behind on bills and finding repayments a heavy burden. The findings come after the Bank of England increased interest rates to 5% last month, the highest for 15 years, and markets are now expecting the bank to raise rates to as much as 6.25% by the end of this year. Now, the Financial Conduct Authority's Financial Lives Tracking Survey in 2017 found 7.7 million adults in the UK were over indebted, which meant that they had missed payments for credit commitments for 3 or more months or were finding bills a heavy burden. The number struggling with debt in the UK rose to 9.6 million in May 2022 and 12.8 million in January this year. And Debt Justice warns that the cost of living crisis and high interest rates risk trapping people in poverty and acting as a drag on the economy for years. So I was wondering about the combination of a decade of Tory austerity, Brexit, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and most recently Liz Truss crashing the UK economy. We're looking at decades of economic pain and suffering. So what opportunity do you think voters in Scotland should take to address these economic challenges?
I think one of the things that what you've described is all this, issues of Brexit, issues of the economy, the what Liz Truss did. The people that have contacted me that are really really scared about how they are going to um, pay back money that they owe, or debt that has increased because of increase in percentages. So there's a lot of people that really, really needs help and support right now. And one of the things that I will do over the summer recess is make sure that when I'm out and about and talking to people, so I'll be at all the agricultural shows and different gals and events, is make sure that people do have the right access to advice and support. But also we know that citizens advice in Dumfries, for instance, is absolutely swamped with people that need help and support right now, and directed to ways where they can manage debt. But ultimately, again, Scotland doesn't have power over controlling our energy market. We don't have power over certain aspects of welfare. If we had full fiscal control and the ability to choose how we spend our money with our, without being constrained, I think I would obviously want the people in Scotland to choose a pathway that supported everybody, and so that we can escape the Tory turmoil, the Tory toxicity that we're witnessing. We witness it every day in chamber. So I would love to see Scotland escape the Tory turmoil and the austerity that has been imposed on Scotland. Scotland hasn't voted for a Tory government for over 6 decades, so I want to see us escape all that and choose our own path for our own prosperity.
Thanks, Emma. Now, we'll continue looking at that aspect because following the SNP's independence convention last Saturday, this week the Scottish Parliament debated a written constitution for an independent Scotland. Yesterday, Yes supporters were out campaigning across Scotland in the latest day of action. So, Emma, I know you were in Dundee last weekend and I suspect you were out yesterday. What are you seeing and hearing on the doorsteps with regard to the campaign for an independent Scotland?
Mm-hmm. So yes, I was in Dundee, and it invigorated me as well as it did many people in the audience. I was sitting right in the front row, in front of the lectern, and it was really good to hear people being really positive, but also making suggestions about um, why we need independence and what the pathway is as well. So, yesterday I was out delivering the latest leaflet that came out, and had the chance to speak to a few folk that were out and about as well. I think the things that we need to do, like for me in the South Scotland, it's really difficult because of the way our where we get our media from, and just the issues around communication, for instance. So I will be again trying to engage with people, to hear what their thoughts are, to hear what they want, and because sometimes what we hear what people are asking for, the Scottish government is actually delivering that already. So what I'm finding is that many people are unaware of what policies are Scottish government delivered policies, like mitigating the bedroom tax. A lot of people think that the bedroom tax has gone away. They don't realise that the Scottish government is the one that the process is paying for the bedroom tax, for instance. And a lot of people just thought, well, it's gone away. I don't have to pay the bedroom tax anymore. But I think what we need to do is engage people and hear what they're asking for, hear what will work for them to make their lives enriched, and also make sure that we communicate the work that the Scottish Government is doing to support young people, to tackle poverty, to help give our kids the best start. And I'm not just talking about baby boxes. I'm talking about what we need to do in order to engage with people about why it's imperative that for Scotland to be more successful, we need to be an independent country.
Thanks, Emma. Now, you said that you found the convention in Dundee last weekend invigorating. Do you think is Hamza Yousaf succeeding in reinvigorating, to use your word, the campaign for Scottish independence, perhaps by focusing more on the why and less on the how?
Yeah. So the First Minister is very visible. He's very visible in Parliament, and he's really engaging. And when he's out and about, I see him. He was out and about yesterday, campaigning as well. So I think the First Minister has some great energy, and he has got a great team, and everybody in the government are really focused on what it is we need to communicate to people. So I think when you're saying it's the why we need independence, because not just what are the steps, because in my engagement with people who say, oh, I just don't want independence, and I say, well, I do, because it allows us to have full fiscal control and choices over plans we make, over immigration, for instance, over how we deliver an energy policy, how we look after our older people, our vulnerable people, our young people. So I think the idea of telling people or engaging with people about why independence is necessary, because the word independence will turn people off in southwest Scotland, for instance. So I spent a lot of time before the last election talking about the necessity of independence as well. So because rather than just use that word, which can shut people down, I wanted to use like the words I was using was, if we had independence, we could do X, or it means that we would have more control over how we deliver our immigration policies, for instance. So I think focusing on the why is a way forward, and a way that we can then engage people in conversations around what it is that they seek for themselves and their family in the future, and then we make the independence argument will work for helping people understand that that's actually what the Scottish Government are wanting to achieve as well.
Thanks, Emma. And that's a good note to finish on, because I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this afternoon. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the generous support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes and to develop the station. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 in order that we can continue to pay the bills. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. We will be back on Monday evening at 7 for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this afternoon, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to our very special guest, Emma Harper MSP. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks very much. I should have put in a plug for my South Scotland Assembly, which is taking place on August 26th. I forgot to do that.
You got the plug in at the end. That's the important thing. Thanks, Emma.
Thank
I hope
you.
that you've enjoyed our program today, and that you have a very peaceful rest of your weekend. Bye bye.